Ever think about the things you just kind of inherently rely on to work?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's the software that manages your, online banking,
Yeah.
or it could even be like the tools your doctor uses to make a
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Yeah.
There's this inherent expectation that it just works right,
Right.
that the information is accurate, that it's secure, no one's tampered with it.
That's a really great point. And especially when we talk about, really critical areas like medicines or anything related to healthcare,
Hmm.
that expectation of reliability is just absolutely paramount.
Absolutely. And how do we ensure that in the digital world?
Right.
Today, we're diving deep into how that trust is built and maintained when it comes to all those digital records and signatures. We're looking specifically at a regulation known as 21 CFR Part 11.
21 CFR Part 11.
It might sound a little bit like alphabet soup,
A little bit, yeah.
but if you've ever stopped and thought, how is all the digital information surrounding, say, the products I use or maybe a medical treatment I'm receiving, how is all of that kept secure and accurate? This is for you. We've gone through the regulation itself, related guidelines like Parts 110, 111, and 211,
Wow.
and even tapped into some insights from people who actually work in this space to bring you the essentials of 21 CFR Part 11.
So essentially, our mission is to break down this seemingly complex regulation and get to the heart of what it's really all about.
Exactly. We want you to walk away understanding how 21 CFR Part 11 really ensures that electronic records in these really critical industries are reliable, secure, and that they meet that very stringent compliance bar.
Yes.
Ultimately, all of this goes back to safeguarding the quality and safety of the products we depend on. So let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. We are not living in a paper-based world anymore.
Right.
Pretty much everything in every industry has transitioned to electronic systems.
Yeah, exactly. And this move to the digital realm has brought like a ton of advantages in terms of how quickly we can do things, the organization and accessibility of the data.
For sure.
But on the flip side, this transformation also comes with new challenges that we need to think about, particularly when it comes to maintaining the integrity of that data and making sure we're still sticking to regulations.
Yeah.
A lot of those were actually crafted with paper records in mind originally.
Right.
So there's a real balancing act that comes into play. How do we leverage all this new digital efficiency, but ensure the kind of robust security and reliability that the regulations demand?
So how do we make sure that these digital records are just as trustworthy as those, old paper files locked away in filing cabinets?
Yeah.
And that's where 21 CFR Part 11 comes in
It
to
does.
bridge that gap. Right.
Exactly. So 21 CFR Part 11, it was issued by the FDA, and it sets the criteria for how we can look at these electronic records and electronic signatures and consider them just as valid as paper records and handwritten signatures.
Right.
It's essentially the rule book that says your digital documentation needs to meet the standards of what we call good manufacturing practices, or GMP for short.
GMP.
GMP.
Those are the fundamental principles for ensuring quality in any regulated industry. So essentially, it's bringing those principles into this new digital age.
Exactly.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts here. What are some of those core requirements that Part 11 lays out for electronic systems?
Okay, so one of the most fundamental requirements is what we call system validation.
Okay.
Part 11 says that any computer system that's used to create, modify, maintain, archive, retrieve, or even transmit those electronic records, they all have to undergo this validation process.
Okay.
Think of it this way. The FDA isn't just saying, does your system work?
Right.
They're asking you to prove that it works consistently and in all the conditions it's expected to operate in.
Oh, I see. So they're really pushing the responsibility back onto the companies or whoever's using the system.
Absolutely. It really shifts the burden of proof from the regulator onto the shoulders of the regulated. These systems have to demonstrate accuracy, reliability, consistent performance, and the ability to detect any records that are invalid or have been changed.
Okay. So this system validation sounds like it's a pretty deep dive itself. I imagine it's more than just running a couple of tests.
Oh, absolutely. And, it actually links directly back to that broader concept of equipment qualification that we see in GMP.
Okay.
You'll often hear these terms tossed around: installation qualification, or IQ, operational qualification, or OQ, and performance qualification, or PQ.
Right.
IQ, OQ, PQ. And these stages are super important for analytical testing in like pharmaceutical GMP labs. But they apply to these digital systems just as much as they do to any piece of physical equipment in the lab.
So they're all part of this bigger master plan to make sure that all the tools are fit for purpose.
Precisely. And it's not just about the initial setup either. I remember in the 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview, there's this section that talks about how even moving physical equipment can throw things off.
Oh, interesting.
And it can mean you have to do the whole qualification process again.
So does that apply to digital systems too?
That's a great question, and it's a really important point to consider. You're absolutely right. Just like relocating a piece of equipment can affect its performance and require requalification, significant changes to a digital system can have the same effect.
Okay.
Something as simple as upgrading the operating system or moving to a new server, these things can impact how the system operates within its validated environment, and they would trigger the need for revalidation to ensure that everything still meets those Part 11 requirements.
Okay, so it's not just set it and forget it. It's a continual process.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about system validation. What's another big pillar of Part 11 that people should know about?
Another really critical element is this requirement for what we call audit trails. Imagine it like a detailed digital diary for each and every important electronic record.
Yeah.
Part 11 actually has a very specific definition for it. It's a secure, computer-generated, time-stamped electronic record that allows for the reconstruction of the sequence of events relating to the creation, modification, or deletion of an electronic record.
Okay, so it's not just, a record of like, okay, this file was changed on this date. It's much more in-depth than that.
You've got it. And what's really interesting is that audit trails don't just capture that a change was made, but they capture the reason behind the change as well.
Oh, wow. So it's really about understanding the why, the decision-making process.
Exactly. It's about understanding why a change was made and making sure it wasn't an accident or, even worse, malicious.
So it's not enough to just know that a record was changed.
Right.
You also need to know who changed it, when they did it, and why they did it.
Exactly. You have to have the who, the when, and most importantly, the why. That audit trail needs to meticulously document all of it. The date and time of any entry or modification, the person who made the change, and the justification for that change.
Okay.
And this ensures a really high level of accountability and traceability, which lines up perfectly with the really rigorous record keeping that's at the heart of GMP regulations.
Yeah.
Think back to FDA 21 CFR Part 211 and things like the GMP 101 webinar transcript. Those all emphasize the need for detailed documentation.
If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen.
Exactly. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. It's about having a clear and auditable history for all of that important electronic data. And audit trails make that happen. They're like the digital version of signing in and out of a lab notebook, but they're way more detailed.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy. So we live in this digital world now, so we don't have those, physical signatures on paper documents.
Right.
How does Part 11 tackle that? What does it say about electronic signatures?
That's a key part of it. Part 11 lays out very specific requirements for how electronic signatures can be considered legally binding. And these requirements ensure that they carry the same weight as a handwritten signature.
Okay.
One of the fundamental principles is that every electronic signature has to uniquely identify the person who signed it, and it needs to be securely linked to the electronic record it belongs to. So these systems, they often use some pretty complex techniques, things like cryptography, to make sure that the signature is linked to both the person and the record in a way that makes it almost impossible to mess with or forge.
So it's not just, typing your name in a box and hitting enter.
Oh, no. It's much more secure than that. There are all sorts of controls in place to ensure that those electronic signatures are secure and haven't been tampered with. And these are designed to stop anyone who shouldn't be signing from doing so, and to verify that the person signing is really who they claim to be.
Got it. So we're talking secure login credentials, password management, maybe even things like biometric authentication.
Exactly.
Like fingerprint scanning and things like that.
Precisely.
Okay. So security is a big deal, obviously, when you're dealing with sensitive electronic records.
Yes.
What other security measures does Part 11 require?
Part 11 is really big on making sure you have solid controls to limit who has access to this system. And it's not just anyone. It has to be authorized personnel only. So you need to set up things like user accounts with specific roles and permissions so that only people with the right clearance can actually perform certain actions. These authority checks, they're super important.
Right.
But the regulation also goes a step further and talks about the physical security of the devices that people use to access these systems. Things like making sure computer terminals are secure so that someone can't just walk up and get into the system. It's about having layers of security.
Right. Digital and physical.
Exactly.
So it's like having both a digital and a physical lock on all of that information and the tools that are used to access it. Now, we've talked a lot about GMP and how it's very strict about having documented procedures for everything. Does Part 11 have similar requirements for how these electronic systems should be used and maintained?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Part 11 is very clear that you need written procedures and controls for how you use and maintain these electronic systems. And this links back to one of those core GMP principles we talked about earlier. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
We see this in FDA 21 CFR Part 211.
Right.
It's all about having proof. So those written procedures, they basically act as the standard operating procedures or SOPs for your digital environment.
Okay.
They're like the SOPs you'd find in a lab, which are outlined in the 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview.
So just having the technology isn't enough. You need a detailed plan for how to use it in a way that meets all those compliance standards.
Exactly. It's not enough to just have the technology. You have to know how to use it right. These procedures need to cover everything, like how do people get access to the system, how's data entered and changed, what happens if there's a system failure, how do you back up and recover data, and even what to do if the system malfunctions. By having these really clear procedures, it ensures that everyone's doing things the same way, that it's easier to train people, and that you're more likely to stay compliant even as people come and go from the organization.
Okay. That makes sense. And training, that's a cornerstone of GMP as well.
Right.
Does Part 11 address training needs when it comes to these systems?
Yes, absolutely. Part 11 specifically states that anyone who uses or manages electronic systems that fall under its scope has to be trained properly.
Oh.
And this training is essential. It makes sure that everyone knows what they're responsible for, that they understand how to use the systems in a way that meets all the requirements, and that they're aware of any potential security risks or data integrity issues that might come up. And this fits right in with those general cGMP training requirements that are laid out in documents like the Pharmaceutical Master Validation Plan.
So it's not just about knowing the science behind the product. It's also about mastering the digital skills that ensure quality and safety.
Exactly.
Now, we've gone through all these individual requirements.
Yeah.
How does all of this fit together? How does Part 11 work within that larger GMP framework?
That's the big picture question, isn't it? And the answer is that Part 11 doesn't exist in isolation. Those requirements are meant to fit seamlessly with those overarching GMP principles.
Right.
It's all about preventing errors, ensuring the quality of the product, and keeping that data integrity throughout the entire life cycle of the product.
Can you give us an example of how these two work together, Part 11 and GMP principles?
Absolutely. So think about Part 11's emphasis on validated systems and those detailed audit trails. This aligns perfectly with how GMP focuses on validating manufacturing processes and meticulously managing batch records. We see that in FDA 21 CFR Part 211. The idea is the same. You need solid evidence that your systems and processes, whether they're physical or digital, are working as they should. And you need a clear, auditable record of every critical activity. It's bringing that GMP mantra, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen, into the digital world.
I see. So when these systems are properly implemented and controlled under Part 11, they actually offer benefits that go way beyond just meeting the regulatory requirements.
For sure. When you have compliant electronic record keeping, it leads to better data integrity and reliability like we've been talking about. But it also makes managing and retrieving data much more efficient, which saves time and resources. And there's robust audit trails with their enhanced traceability and accountability. They're invaluable when it comes to investigations and making sure the quality is where it needs to be. Plus, you reduce the risk of human error that you often see with those manual paper-based systems. And it actually makes regulatory inspections and audits smoother because everything's organized and accessible. And it's interesting because a lot of companies find that when they really embrace Part 11 and implement it thoroughly, they uncover all these unexpected benefits in terms of how efficient their internal processes are and the insights they can gain from their data.
Oh, wow. So they're turning a regulatory requirement into a competitive advantage.
Exactly.
So for our listeners out there, what are the key takeaways they should be thinking about after this deep dive?
If you work in any sort of regulated industry like pharmaceuticals, medical devices, biotechnology, dietary supplements, really any of those.
It's a big list.
It is a big list. Having a strong grasp of 21 CFR Part 11. That's essential. It's not just a nice to have. It's part of your job, and it's how you ensure your organization is meeting all those compliance standards.
And even if you don't work directly in these fields, why is it important to understand Part 11?
You know, as a consumer, Just knowing that the electronic records behind those healthcare products that you rely on are held to such a high standard should give you some peace of mind.
Yeah.
It's part of that behind-the-scenes framework that's working to protect public health. And even more broadly, those core principles of data integrity and security that are at the heart of Part 11, they're relevant in our digital lives too.
Right.
It's not just about regulated industries. We all need to be able to trust and verify information online.
So these regulations, while they might be specific to certain industries, they're really touching on something universal.
Exactly.
Trust in a digital age.
It is all about trust.
So to wrap things up, what are the main points our listeners should walk away with from our deep dive into 21 CFR Part 11?
At its core, 21 CFR Part 11 is all about making sure that electronic records and signatures in those regulated industries are trustworthy.
Right.
And it does this through a handful of really key requirements.
Right.
Thorough system validation, proving your systems work, comprehensive audit trails, they provide that digital history, robust security measures, protecting access and data,
Yeah.
and clear written procedures and controls, guiding compliant use.
So many pieces.
There are a lot of moving parts, but they all work together under that umbrella of good manufacturing practices to guarantee that data is accurate and ultimately that the product is safe and high quality.
And as we said at the very beginning, this regulation is essential for ensuring the quality and safety of those products that we as listeners and consumers depend on every day.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a crucial part of that puzzle that keeps our supply chain safe and protects public health in our increasingly digital world.
So as technology keeps advancing, it really makes you wonder how regulations like Part 11 are going to have to adapt to keep pace and ensure that critical information stays secure and reliable.
Right.
What new challenges might pop up with things like artificial intelligence and blockchain technology in record keeping for these highly regulated industries? It's definitely something to ponder.
It is. And those are some really important questions for the future of regulation.
Definitely.
And for our listeners, we really hope that this deep dive has shed some light on the vital role that regulations like 21 CFR Part 11 play in shaping those products and services that you encounter every day. And we encourage you to keep exploring this really interesting intersection of technology and regulation.